crisp musical intro. All right, let's just jump right in with a wild idea. What if ancient poetry wasn't just poetry? What if it was a code? A code hiding the secrets of the stars, the actual laws of physics. Sounds kind of crazy, right? Like something out of a movie. But that's the core idea we're digging into today, based on a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty out there interpretation of ancient texts. You hear a line like that and you immediately think, okay, deep spiritual poetry, right? But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's another layer, a really literal, scientific meaning, buried not just in the words, but in the rhythm, in the structure of the poem itself? So, the source for all this is a text called Vedic, and its whole argument is, well, it's pretty mind-bending. It says these hymns are basically a user's manual for the universe, for stars, for quantum physics, the whole shebang. And the key, the real secret, isn't just what the words say, but how they're structured, the meter, the rhythm. That's where the physics is supposedly hidden. And really, this whole theory boils down to one central idea. It's a concept called rashmis, or metrical rays. Now stay with me here. The claim is that these rays aren't just a poetic device. Nope, they're meant to be literal descriptions of fundamental cosmic forces. The very forces that build and run everything, from a giant star all the way down to the tiniest particles. Okay, so where do we even start with that? Let's go big. Let's talk about a star. You'd think the energy inside a star is just this wild, chaotic inferno, right? Well, according to this text, you'd be wrong. It says it's all perfectly managed by a special crew of these metrical rays. The first three have a collective name, Dharmathanu, and you can seriously think of them like a cosmic project management team. You've got the first ray. Its job is PR, it spreads the light around, makes everything luminous. Then you've got the second ray, the engineer, digging deep into the star's core to pull out the raw energy. And the third ray? That's logistics. It's in charge of shipping, managing and moving all those energized particles where they need to go. So what's the big picture for these three? What's their end goal? Well, this interpretation says they're working in concert to kind of sculpt the star's energy. They guide it, shape it into all its different forms, UV light, gamma rays, all of it. They even play defense, protecting the good electricity the star makes and propelling particles out into deep space. All right, so that's the big picture stuff, stars. But now, the text does something pretty dramatic. It zooms all the way down, from the massive to the microscopic. And this is where things get really controversial, because it makes a claim that flies directly in the face of modern physics. It's all about the photon. Okay, quick high school physics reminder. The standard model, the theory that underpins basically all of modern physics, tells us a photon is fundamental. It's an elementary particle. It's the single, smallest possible piece of light. Indivisible. You just can't slice it up any smaller. And let's be clear, the standard model isn't just some flimsy idea. It's one of the most successful, most tested theories we've ever come up with. But Vedic just throws that right out the window. It paints a totally different picture. It says a photon is not indivisible. Not at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It says a photon is a bundle. A bundle of even smaller little energy fibers it calls tantu. And the text is super direct about it too. It flat out says a photon is not the minimum unit of energy, that it's a cluster of fibers. I mean, that's the big break from mainstream science right there. So you gotta ask, right? How on earth do they back that up? Well, its proof is actually based on something we see all the time in physics labs. But the conclusion it draws from that observation, that's what's totally new. It all boils down to a simple collision, a photon bumping into another particle. So let's walk through it. Imagine a photon zipping along, and bam, it smacks into an electron or something. Now, we know for a fact from countless experiments that it usually only gives away some of its energy. Then a new, weaker photon keeps going. This isn't theory, this is stuff we can see and measure. Okay, so here's the twist. The interpretation of that event. The argument goes like this. If a photon was truly one single indivisible thing, how could it give up part of its energy? A collision would have to be all or nothing, right? It would give up all its energy and just cease to exist. Poof. The very fact that it can give up just a little bit, the text argues, is proof that it's a bundle. It's just shedding a few of its fibers and carrying on. So if we accept this idea, just for a second, that a photon is a bundle, then the next logical question is, what's building the bundle? And you guessed it, the text has an answer. Another group of those metrical rays. This time they're like a quantum construction crew. And there are 9 of them. To be specific, the text points to 9 different hymns, and it claims that their unique rhythms and meters are actually descriptions of 9 different forces that build matter from the ground up. So what's on their to-do list? Well, it's pretty epic stuff. They crank up the dial on light, heat, and gravity. They do cleanup duty inside a star, getting rid of junk. They create the particles that act like cosmic glue. And here's the big one. They're the ones who actually assemble the photons. And this is where it all comes together. The logic is that the different, complex rhythms in these 9 hymns, they aren't just poetic flair. They're the blueprints. They're the instructions for how these forces should squeeze and compress raw cosmic stuff into those photon bundles we were just talking about. So in this way of thinking, the poetry, the meter, is the machine. Okay, let's take a step back for a second and just think about this. What does all this really mean? I mean, whether you buy it or not, whether it's a lost science or just a really creative rereading, it makes you ask a pretty profound question. What does it mean if an ancient hymn can be read like a physics formula? Because that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The whole framework of VVA.pdf is built on this idea that these ancient verses are a forgotten scientific language, a language where poetry is physics. So just to quickly recap the main points from this interpretation, the whole universe is run by these so-called metrical rays. A team of 3 of them are the energy managers for stars. Down at the tiny, tiny level, a photon isn't a single particle, it's a bundle of fibers. And that bundle gets built by a crew of 9 other rays, the quantum architects. Which brings us to a really interesting final thought. Look, this text offers one very radical way to look at ancient wisdom. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? If someone can interpret a hymn as a physics formula, what else are we looking at every day but not really seeing? What other secrets might be hiding out there, just in plain sight, waiting for us to find the right way to look at them?